So let's look at a line here that you have greater cult of personality, right? Like you're looking at two intellectuals talking in some public environment, and it's like you have greater cult of personality, but an intellectual wouldn't rely on that. So it wouldn't come down to that, like if you as a random person were to go up on stage. So this is the same exchange where that line comes from in my writing, where these two characters are talking, and then he says, basically, your stature, experience, etc. is why we give you the microphone, right? It's why we listen, or no, wait. It was like, your stature is why we give you the microphone, right? Why you're up on this stage, but it doesn't obligate us to listen or to agree with what you say, right? So never use that as an argument, like, oh, I'm experienced, so therefore everything I say is right. But that's not true. It's your experience. That's why we're listening to you. Now you have to actually make a good, compelling argument with the audience that you get, right? So it's like authority using authority as its basis. So once you're in power, oh, something is right because it's done by the government, or something is right because power does it. Not that, oh, we have to hold power accountable, that the reason why it has power in the first place is because what it's doing is right or useful or logical, or see, like we get it inverted. We elect people to power so that they can do something that we think is valuable or good or worthwhile or, just good. So now, once they have power, we look at it the opposite way, like, oh, we have to comply, we have to go along with it, we have to deal with it, or, somehow use that to validate it. Well, it's good because the government does it, or because the government says it, or because authority figures do or say something that makes it good, rather than holding it accountable to be good. You see this spread out through a lot of areas, like, oh, it's good because your parents say it's good, or it's good because your teacher says it's good. You're not actually holding it accountable to a standard. You're just mindlessly accepting it. And there's a lot of bypassing of accountability, even with the proposed pretense standard that might be held, which is to say that it's just a way to shut down thought. It's not actually answering it at all. The same way that an indoctrinated basis. This is one thing that I've been saying lately a couple times, because it's the same thing I've said in the past, but I didn't say it quite this way, which is, again, the standards that you accept and abide by, and the life that you have, and the society that you're in, is not a product of careful, objective thought and consideration and merit and standards and consistency or credibility. Rather, it's a result of subverting and bypassing those same things that you would apply to anything else. So if I was to introduce a new ideology or a set of standards, or even from a different culture, a different part of history, or just a general idea that I come up with, set of ideas that I come up with, a lifestyle, ideology, etc., you would hold it accountable and say, well, this is wrong, this is inconsistent, this I don't like, this I don't agree with, this isn't consistent, this isn't my standard or my measure that I would have, right? So you would apply some critical thinking to it. If I presented, or anybody else presented, or if you considered any new idea or different idea or externality, different cultures, different countries, etc. So you would apply that critical lens to it and accountability to it, and you would ask a lot of questions of it. But you don't do that for the life that you have, and you didn't do that. You didn't arrive upon that. How did you arrive upon it? Understand the nature of the process. You arrived upon it by indoctrination when you were too young to think about it. You arrived by bypassing every step of the way of accountability through authority, empirical structure, preconceived notions, right, already set in place that use authority and conditioning and other things to bypass and subvert that. Because again, you're indoctrinated when you're young, you're bypassed by authority, by empirical structure, power, conditioning, contrivance, and bypassing by constant closed structure, contrivance, social stigma, reinforcement. So it's done by bypassing all of that, but then it's posed as an absolute in the end. So you see the duality of that. Somebody who could be an absolutist by a particular process, like, so let's say somebody who's rich, they would be above the normal social contrivances, like, oh, they don't have to do it, or they can bypass it. Or somebody who, oh, you just don't get it, the emperor has no clothes fallacy, you're just a label here, you're just not good enough at it, you just don't get it, you're just a blank, right? So either way, either extreme, you could be you could be absolutist, you could be, sort of the anti-false duality proposition. So it comes to the same thing, that it's not a necessary process, or it's not as absolute as it's supposed to be. But there's the non-consensual social contract back again. So what it comes back down to is a simple realization that the realization is that you would, again, be indoctrinated before you're old enough to think about it, bypassing critical thinking, using preconceived established structures and authority and empirical basis and constant social contrivance, reinforcement, constant sort of closed structure, sensor reality, all these different things. So the point is, by bypassing that, you get to a state where something that otherwise would be critically thought about, again, it's not to invalidate it in particular in favor of something else, idyllic, alternative, etc. It's simply to say that that same exact standard that you follow, that you abide by, society, etc., not even really a clear, defined, consistent standard either, but the state that you're in would be invalidated by simply objective observation, and especially in the exclusionary, specific way that it's presented. Like, oh, this one thing that you do, this one set of, supposed standards that you have, society that you are in, you wouldn't be able to come to that conclusion comfortably, because there'd be so many other variables. Like, you would never come to that conclusion in specific in a uniform, one-size-fits-all way. You would have variables, you would have different preferences, different measure, different standard, different degrees of value for certain things. Like, there would be no uniform way. So the way that that's achieved is not as a result of answering the questions that you would ask of anything else, right? It's not that, you would hold anything else accountable and ask questions. It's not that it's answered. It's not that it's answered by that rather than anything else. It's that it's not asked, or that the asking is bypassed. So by that process, then it's arbitrary and could be anything. Because again, the process by which you're reaching that standard is not as an adult who's thinking for themselves. Now you consider it, now you decide for yourself, right? That's not how you appear and arrive at the standard of society that you happen to live in arbitrarily, that you never had a choice in, that you didn't create, that you didn't actively hold accountable, that you didn't consider from an objective, self-aware, and inherent-based state, the one that I always talk about. So it doesn't matter at that point what the specific society is. It doesn't matter what your specific standard, preference, idyllic, alternative measure could be. None of that matters, because it's all about the process by which you get there. So forget about the end result. Even if you happen to get to the exact same point, then at least you should be able to do it from that objective standpoint, instead of, having it forced on you and then just using ex post facto justification after indoctrination, after bypassing, after authority, after empirical basis, after preconceived notions, after constant social contrivance, stigma, right? After all of that, now it has advantages. It takes monopoly over resources. It's tied to functionalism, right? So that by that arbitrary basis, you can explain everything. You can explain by the lack of explanation or lack of critical thought or process that goes into it. It's just an arbitrary process that could be interchangeable, as you see throughout history, as you see throughout different cultures, different countries. So it becomes arbitrary and interchangeable, which is similar to an existential statement that I've made, or observation that I've made in the past, which is the simple fact that because you can't explain every single thing, that explains everything in the manner that, there is no God, there is nothing that we, these are all just things that we come up with in response. So because we can't explain everything down to the basic origin, etc., like what a God would provide, since we can't explain everything like that, it explains everything else, every single thing, because it's all arbitrary and random. So there are no absolutes, as in, how can people do such horrible, evil things? But they're not horrible and evil. They're just things that human beings are capable of doing. And so we want to create it like, it's an absolute that doing this is wrong. But we only create that because it's not the case. So we try to create this illusion of it, right? But it's never going to be absolute. So we can try to pose a functional basis. How do we create the illusion of it? And how do we discourage people from doing it? But that's why. So it explains every tendency people could possibly have, everything that could possibly happen wouldn't be a surprise, because you would look at it from that objective lens that, it just is what it is. Not in a certain way that you would say that, but there is no grand design that we're aware of, at least. There is no, clear sort of human logic to it. That's how objective reality works. It's not a human standard. It's So even to look at it as random is sort of human-centric to say random compared to what? It's a cause and effect. It's a sequence of events. It just is what it is, right? But we're looking at it from, we want some sort of rhyme and reason. We want some sort of, we want it to revolve around us. We want it to be understood or sort of human-centric. There's an ego appeal, too, that, like, why does it have to be random or empty or meaningless or, the universe is cold and objective and harsh? It doesn't have to be any of that. It just exists, and a natural process will take its turn. So that's how it is for animals. That's how it is for other living things. That's how it was before there was anything living, right, on Earth, etc. So it's just a process that happens, but we try to attach special meaning to it because we're a very narcissistic, egocentric kind of a mindset that we look at from it. Like, no, it has to have this exact special meaning that revolves around us and that caters to us. So you're not actually making a claim by simply observing objective reality. It's kind of always a difficult thing. The cui bono effect. Do you want to argue for or believe in what you want to believe? Like, we have heaven and we have this and that and we have all these things that we want. So it's arguing from a position of desire. You cannot dissuade with reason what came about by desire, by old logical razors. So you're arguing for what you would want to believe versus what actually is objective reality. So even to best achieve what you want, you should recognize what objective reality is and then try to counteract it, rather than pretending what you want to be true is true just because you want it to be true. And then I'm kind of behind with editing these now, but it's not a bad amount of content. And I change my channel name and stuff too. I wanted it to change it kind of overall because I don't want to use that one anymore, even though it says it in my channel art. But whatever, it doesn't matter. I should really take advantage. I tried streaming on YouTube too, which I don't know if that made much of a difference, but so what else do we have here? We have a situation of but yeah, like the fact that you can't explain everything, as in the origin of everything and trace it back all the way. Because you can't explain that, you can't explain anything in particular. Or it's sort of, no, that's not how I said it. It's, you could ask that about anything. Like, look at a blade of grass, and that'll ask you the existential question. You can explain photosynthesis and raining and this and that. You can explain scientific processes, but you cannot explain the ultimate origin point. So you can look at a blade of grass or any random thing and trace it back to, ultimately we can't explain where it came from and what it depends on and everything else around it that had to come into being for it to make sense or for it to be possible. We can't explain the entire origin and process of it. So we ultimately don't really know anything, even if we explain it in a reactive, technical jargon sense to some degree, right? We don't ultimately have the answer to it. And then that takes away the credibility to outwardly insist and tell other people what to do, which you have no credibility or consistency to do. Even if you use a pretense of a functional basis, like, it just works, then by that logic, it could work more efficiently. It's not entirely consistent. It's arbitrary. It assumes intent. It assumes a measure. It projects. It preconceives. It creates a closed structure, false duality. So it's not, you don't actually have any credibility at all. There is no subjective credibility. It's one person's word against another, and it's based on their own preconceived notions and priority, right? You can never assume somebody's intent. So what if their intent is just something different? That's why you need these figures like God that people try to pose as it's not your word against mine or my word against a million different people. It wouldn't matter how many, right? Even Darwinism, etc., is not absolute. So social Darwinism, none of that is absolute or supersedes it. So that's why it's not one subjective human idea against another. It's instead, God's saying it, so now you can't question it. Instead of, if a person was saying it, then you can attack them, you can point out their idiosyncrasies, discredit them, etc. So everyone's equally arbitrary and lacking in credibility in that way. And then you have And the other point is that, again, the fact that you can't explain, the lack of an explanation for everything explains everything that could possibly happen, right? The fact that we don't know about the origin point, that we don't know about some grand design, that there is, that there is no one big grand plan or answer to everything, explains everything that could possibly happen, because to us it would seem, random or arbitrary, but it's only random or arbitrary compared to our own expectation. So because, the origin of everything was quote-unquote random, or that we can't explain it, or that doesn't have a grand design, that would then explain everything that comes after, because everything that comes after is arbitrary and random because, it could be anything, because there is no grand plan or design or ultimate origin point. And the framing of that as negative is only by our own, we want it to revolve around us, so it's negative compared to that. In reality, it's just events, cause and effect, etc. that happen. So that's the point, is because there is no explanation for everything, that explains every single thing that could possibly happen, because now it makes sense, because we're not using some preconceived expectation that, it's just events that are happening, and our own special meaning that we seek is not relevant. And one of the things with that is the fact that, I had a better way of saying it, but that's effectively how it went. The fact that we can't explain everything, it actually explains every single thing that could happen, because, if the origin of the universe is random, then that explains all the random things that seem arbitrary and without design that happen after it. So it's not so much that it's random is even the wrong word, because that's like as if we're expecting something, right? Events are happening, and we're looking deeper into them for something more, but that's how we think, right, within our human perspective. But, again, so that the random origin of everything would explain the random events that happen. That, how could there be these planets, and then life, and then, dinosaurs, and then humans, and then all the, how could we explain that? But why do we need to explain it? Like, within what framing would we explain it? They're just events that happen to be occurring. So, again, it only seems random if you bring in some external expectation, but again, the random nature of existence explains everything that could happen within it, and even of people. Like, it wouldn't surprise you anything a person could possibly do, because they're capable of doing it. So, you're not adequately indoctrinated, but that whole perception is the problem, right? That you require it in the first place would explain that you could do anything. And here's another aspect of why do people require meaning or special purpose? Animals don't require that, right, etc. So the reason why is because of our, number one, our ego, the human ego, that we think we're special, or we want to, attach some special meaning to it for that reason. But number two is also the contrivance of reduction to structure, that you're reduced in society to a half-mass state. So now you glorify something into being more than what it is to reduce it to a state where it's less than what it is. So you pose a false absolute to control it. So you say, it's not just animals humping like hedonism, stimuli acme. It's not that. It's something more. And because it's something more, now you reduce it to something that's less. So you can specify and create a false absolute, right, to be controlled. That's the easiest way to control people, is to say, it's not that we're just saying that, be with only one person, etc., because it's easier to control for society and create a family system. And if you want to make that functional basis, then that's fine. But the reason why you're actually doing it is because you would convince them that it's special meaning and absolute, like, no, we're not just trying to control you and create a family system that, again, you could defer and make a sacrifice to the collective contrivance state for a functional basis, but you're not making that argument. What you're instead doing is you're saying, no, let's appeal to their ego and to their nearness postulate to create a false absolute to specify the conflict in the process. So you say, no, everybody can have their own idyllic absolute, that, it's love and it's meant to be and it's the soulmate and it's meant for you. That's to appeal to them to say, now you can be controlled within this process that's specified, and so you're only with one person and you have a family system, etc. So it's an idyllic way. That's a non-accountable false absolute. If it doesn't work out, then it's just not meant to be. That just wasn't the absolute for you. Not that it isn't absolute, or it's just an arbitrary process. And So you require that meaning, an absolute, to say, oh, you need an absolute, because otherwise you wouldn't have any reason to place undue emphasis and specify what would otherwise be a universal, objective, interchangeable process. So it's a way to control a process, say, oh, this process is more than just base hedonism or base, natural process, because if it was that, then you could just do it freely, uninhibited. There'd be no means or reason to control it, or kind of reduce its structure, etc., half-mass state. So the way to control it is to pretend like it's something more, and it's an absolute. So now you reduce it to actually something less, that it ultimately comes down to the same thing. That's ultimately what it's about, dependent over extended pretense, but you kind of dance around it and go through so much effort to achieve the same thing. You go through so much effort to achieve the same thing. I don't know if that got cut off. Right, just to achieve the same ultimate end in a lesser way, lesser state, more inhibited, more, contrivance, overextension to achieve the same thing. And you do that because of the simple fact that so you can specify, you can say, okay, the nearness postulate, everybody can have their own little quote-unquote absolute, even though that would defeat the whole meaning of it, just to rationalize it to themselves and feel special about it, right? Place undue emphasis to control it within a half-mass state. So that's where the special need for meaning and absolutes comes from, that otherwise you would just freely practice it uninhibited, but to control it within a society and reduce it to a lesser state, to basically tell you how to do it, when to do it, what to do around it. You create this false absolute process. Everything has to be like walking on eggshells around it. Stimuli, acme, sensory reality. Something as basic as the human body is turned into some idol of worship or idol of embarrassment and stigma, when really it's just a natural process that should have neither of those, that would have neither of those connotations to it. But you create that just so it can be controlled, not because it actually is an absolute state, etc. So you're placing undue emphasis just to create that situation, because you have a situation where you place an undue emphasis to specify the process that otherwise would be uninhibited. So that need of an absolute or emphasis, or of the need for that pretending it's something more, or how did I say it? An absolute or meaning, some special meaning, is only necessary to, again, overextend the state, to specify the state, to restrict it, to control it. Now you require some overcompensation to reduce it to that half-mass state, instead of just being uninhibited and free with how you would treat it in its objective state of reality. So now you overcompensate by saying you reduce it to this half-mass controlled state, and then you overcompensate for that reduction by some false absolute meaning and special emphasis that you're placing on it. So it explains why people supposedly need that. So take away all meaning, and it wouldn't be that, oh, that's a negative state, then what's the point of living, etc., etc. No, it would be, what's the point of contrivance then? What's the point in reducing the inherent objective reality that we see before us, our inherent desires, suggested tendencies, right? We create this false illusion of meaning, when really all that it achieves through machination, process, collective contrivance, is just to make the inherent practice of what we do easier, like take our non-choice zero-sum sustenance and try to either overcompensate with half-mass hedonism, like, oh, the food we need to eat that we didn't choose to eat tastes better, but it's still part of that non-choice reaction zero-sum process, and also of just zero-sum sustenance, but, oh, we try to overcompensate with hedonism and pleasure, the meaning, false meaning and means, and then also you have the that, and you also have the ability to, you would have the hedonism, and you would also have just make it easier and more convenient. So that doesn't answer the question, it just removes the desire or need to ask the question, as in, oh, what meaning is there? But now you don't question what meaning there is, because, oh, it's so easy and automatic to sustain it, right? That's all the human technology and accomplishment does. So it's false meaning and means, and you try to find false meaning in the relief of those non-choice reaction, zero-sum tendencies and processes, longevity process, half-mass hedonism, machination process explains all this. So So that would be the point. If you take away all supposed meaning and undue emphasis, it would not be a negative state, quote unquote, like, oh, then why not just inherent self-infliction, etc.? Oh, life has no meaning. That would only be required for the half-mass reductive state that you're in. Like, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't be free and uninhibited. That's all it would lead to then. You take away the supposed meaning, and then you're left with, so you would just uninhibitedly practice your inherent desires, suggested tendencies. So you would just do the stimuli acme, for example, freely, uninhibited, just like that, or you would do everything just uninhibited. So it's only necessary to rationalize a state, to try to justify and overcompensate for a state of inhibition. I'm having trouble doing this today, or maybe I'm talking too loudly. I feel like I have to project sometimes more than what I actually have to do. But the point is that would be the rationalization. This is my original prognostication of the the machination process that I'm going through. So the point with that is the simple fact that again, the meaning you pose would only be necessary in the absence of, or rather, the absence of meaning would only be an issue if you had to control or contrive it in a certain way. Otherwise, the process would speak for itself. You would just do naturally what animals do. It's just a zero-sum process. You would just hunt and kill and do what you do for zero-sum self-interest, zero-sum means, zero-sum sustenance, trying to live as long as possible, trying to do hedonism, which ultimately is what it boils down to anyway, but we overextend through the machination process in some other ways, so we create false meaning and means. And the other realization is the simple fact that you have the other aspect of the machination process and false meaning comes into that meaning would only be necessary in that capacity because of the simple fact that you have, again, a reduced state. So you take the inherent objective reality, and that would be a zero-sum process, and that would be enough on its own. You're just trying to live as long as possible. You're just trying to do what you can do, right? What you need to do, non-choice reaction, relieve the non-choice needs that you need to do, that you have to do, like having to eat, having to sleep, having to have shelter, clothing, to the extent to try to survive. Even those things are not entirely necessary, but whatever. You're trying to survive, live as long as possible, again, overcompensate, half-mass hedonism, and all of that. So the point is that you would not need to do that, and the reason why you would not need special meaning is because the process would be free and uninhibited and speak for itself. So again, the attachment of meaning actually shows you it's an inhibited state. You're trying to say, you can only do it this way, you can't do this, you can't do that, you have to do this, you have to do that. The only way that works with how you would practice an otherwise objective, inherent, natural process, like stimuli, acme, etc., the only way to restrict it that way is now you overcompensate and say, oh, there's special meaning, God said to do it, this is the, special morality, appeal to ego gratification, and, there's some special meaning to it, instead of just, oh, it's a zero-sum process, but now you can't inhibit it or control it. So that's the reason why it's done. So meaning is not really the issue. Like, oh, life is meaningless. That's not the issue. The extreme closed structure, contrivance, overextension, restriction, inhibition, that would be the outward issue that then creates the need for some sort of undue emphasis, overcompensation, and special meaning to try to sort of make up for that in a way. So there's a character in one of my stories that always does this hand motion, right? Like they're holding their hand out, facing down, the fingers facing down, like as if they're lending somebody a hand, as if they're gonna help somebody up, kind of. And there's a few images like that. There's one where somebody clutches their wrist to show that their life is in their hands. That's the absolutist symbol. That's kind of like clutching the wrist to show that, I feared nothing. I could, inherent self-infliction if I wanted to, etc. So, I fear nothing. I'd rather, basically my life is in my hands. There's a lot of depth and nuance to that, but this one has a very good comeuppance to it, where the fingers facing out, right? This person was censored and completely sabotaged, right, by somebody who was very powerful, and then who he ends up getting back at him and convicting him for his war crimes, and then he's about to be executed, and then he spits in his face, and he just lets it sit there. He doesn't even Like, I've taken all this. You think I can't take a little bit of spit? And then he watches him die. But there's a time where his will is so great that despite being censored, despite going through so much, right, he still keeps doing it. He still keeps helping other people. And so in that final moment, the guy is almost giving up, and then he's on the ground, and he reaches up. He reaches up as if to be helped, right? But then instead he knocks his hand away, and then he chokes him with the hand instead of picking him up. So it's basically using that same imagery, just in a good way, where, it's very it's sort of satisfying. It's almost like it's partly inspired by George Bush, I guess. The fact that, imagine, you finally get him for his war crimes that he's gotten away for so long, and you were like a journalist too. That's not really what it is, but like you were trying to expose that, and you get censored and attacked in all kind of different ways that you would have play out there. And so you have a situation where, you finally get at the war criminal through great difficulty and great patience, and it's almost like this disbelief where he starts to believe in you too, where like, he's so stunned by your resolve, by the character's resolve, that he says, okay, fine, save me too then. But obviously he's denied then. Alright, so let's look at a concept here too. Like, everything is artificial, so it's easy to manipulate. So don't blame like AI or something like that, it's easy to do that because everything that we value is artificial in the first place. So appearances or whatever, you wear a piece of clothing that can change how it looks like on the fly. Right, so it looks like normal clothing, but it can change the appearance throughout and things like that. Sunglasses that can change to things that probably should exist or maybe even do exist and I'm not aware, but like on a mass scale that could be futuristic things. Like, oh, don't blame that for invalidating clothing. It just shows you how artificial and meaningless it is anyway. Or even the fact that there's a character in one of my stories that is like always impatient and like saying I'll just wait, and sort of just, they're always like that. And it's like, oh, what is the higher measure that they're trying to go for? What are they trying to do? But it doesn't matter, right? If something's worth doing, it's worth doing efficiently and get it over with, done. And if it's not, then don't. But don't give it the halfway, like, try to overcompensate and pretend it's more than what it is, to try to overcompensate for the fact that it's not, to try to overextend it to a collective state. So it's this endless process of inefficiency and half-mast consideration that doesn't actually have a measure to it, because it's non-basis self versus non-basis self. So there is actually no standard. It's just overextending self to collective to self, right? Whatever supposed standard might be used is not actually consistent in that way. And then you have a situation where, okay, let's look at the concept here. The non-basis self-dependent overextended pretense, that necessary and valid. So it shows you that if you'd have to take contrivance insisting upon itself, which wouldn't be necessary if a process actually had self-evident value. So it's a half-mass state that overcompensates for itself constantly. You would have to take it seriously, even though it's just unnecessary overcompensation, insistence, right, that's either adverse or maintains a half-mass state, overcompensates for it, right, self-defeating, finite, everyone. You would need to take it seriously, but at the same time, if you take it too seriously and fully seriously, that's also a bad thing. So that shows you the half-mass state, that it's being valued only in pretense, that if you truly value the standard process, whatever, dependent over standard pretense, then you would more efficiently achieve it just on its own. And if you didn't do that, then you wouldn't need the pretense at all, or you would value the pretense then, if it was valuable on its own, then it wouldn't be a pretense at all, but it is. So you don't truly value that as just a means to an end. So social contrivance is a good example of that. And then let's look at a character type that's like the perfectionist who takes everything fully seriously. So it's like you wouldn't be able to parse it halfway and say, like deferring to other people and giving them the benefit of the doubt. Like when they're young, okay, I'll accept that people really believe in religion, so there must be more to it than that, but then there isn't. Or, you analogize it to the Easter Bunny, basically. It's like that. So surely if people really believe it, they can't be this stupid, or it can't, there must be something I don't get. Like the emperor has no clothes fallacy that, if you don't get it, it's somehow your fault. So you go from that, and then you also go to you go from that, and you go to you go to a situation where deferring to others, like, giving them the benefit of the doubt. Clearly people can't be that stupid, or clearly a standard is like, it's like a misframing. If you're aware of the nature of a process, or see through the process, or don't take the process seriously, it'll be that, you lack the ability to practice the absolute process. Not that the process isn't absolute, right? So it's always collectively shown like that. False duality, closed structure contrivance. But the one thing is that there's like a framing of personalization or specification, which is totally missing the point of objectivity. And anybody can think, but like as if framing for a particular point, but it's actually the opposite, right? Objectivity could invalidate everything, so it doesn't argue for a specific, because everything that's outward is contrivance, so that would be potentially inconsistent or invalidating. So it wouldn't benefit somebody, because the result could be, just a base minimalistic state from which then you could define a measure, which would still be your subjective criteria. So it'd be very open-ended. It doesn't go in with a preconceived notion. Whereas a lot of other, contrivance response will try to reinforce itself no matter what the state, right? Whatever state just happens to be non-choice reaction. Now you just try to insist upon it and react, and there's a great sense of human ego in that too. Like you struggle to maintain, right, what you are, even if you didn't choose it, even if something's flawed with it. You're like, that's just the way I am, so I'm just going to defend it, instead of trying to change it and become better, and realize that the only reason you are that way is because of circumstances you couldn't control, like something as a child, etc. Right, or like, your country, I'm going to fight to defend my country and its honor, and I'm offended by this or that. But you realize, you just value it because you happen to be born there. If you were born somewhere else, you'd value that, and it's an endless, sort of stupid cycle process like that. And then beyond that, you also learn from the reality that, again, like that character type, let's say they defer, they always let others speak, they don't like to interrupt other people, they give everybody the benefit of the doubt, they assume the intelligence of others, they assume that people actually have a high standard, right? So like, for example, like they wouldn't do anything because they feel like, it's got to be perfect, otherwise why bother? But then you realize the kind of thing, there's two conflicts. One is that the real conflict isn't so much making it so perfect, it's dumbing it down to the lowest common denominator for appeal. That's what you would have to do. Or that the standard actually isn't that high at all, and that's just your own standard, right? So that, like, the elitist aspect of this, and then again, like giving people the benefit of the doubt. So let's look at how these things would be misframed. You give people the benefit of the doubt that they're not dumb, and that they have brains, and that they can think. So then you might be more quiet as a result, because you yourself think a lot, and then also you assume that they think and are able to figure things out. So speech in that case would almost not be necessary, aside from undue emphasis, overcompensation, things that shouldn't be necessary with a sound process, or just insistence, or just redundancy. So you remove the need for that and assume that they are thinking as well. But since they're not, or since it's an initial LCD basis, or they're used to undue emphasis, overcompensation, pretense that's necessary, now you do it a different way that, that somehow makes you appear stupid, or it makes you appear to them, it makes you appear somehow incapable in some way, even though it's because you're giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're not dumb, or that they have some measure of self-awareness, etc., instead of, again, reducing the infinite objective mind to the physical initial state, LCD, which is the whole purpose of social contrivance, which, again, the comfort in that is supposedly, perceptibly, that, it's easier to predict and control, even though it's not at all, because people can obviously just hide that fact. But, that's what the whole absolutist appearance would be negatively perceived, because they could do anything at any time because they're free from contrivance. They're not initial reduced to a reactionary state. But that could be positive, it could be negative, and anybody could do that theoretically. It's just that they won't realize it, so it'll be like, some major stimuli that makes them do it. Emotion or something, instead of a rational basis where you can do anything because that's you're physically capable of doing. So, that'll be somehow negatively framed, but it doesn't work because, we can't let human beings think freely because it might lead to them doing something that we consider bad, but it could also lead to them doing something good. So that should, preventing people from thinking should not be the operative aspect. And again, the whole thing here is the attack on the mind, as if not to define humanity by its defining trait, which is the mind, the ability to think, self-awareness, right? As if that should not be the measure. That's what separates us from animals. All this other stuff is a bit of a misnomer, like the heart, emotion, all those kind of things. The real defining factor, which a lot of that is tied to the mind anyway, that we just kind of misname it. But it would be the mind, right? But we somehow fragment that and act like, emotion, irrational insistence, overcompensation, appeal to the ego, right? All of this would be seen as somehow affirming, but yeah, the mind-defining trait of humanity, and also that everything is specified and personalized, not just as a thought process that anybody could consider, and it doesn't always have to be some reinforcement of a worldview. But this, again, the LCD myopic basis, supposedly, you would justify it in functionalism, but even that doesn't work because it's not maximum functionalism, half-mass state, still overextended. So it's an arbitrary process that has no actual sound basis, but again, insisted upon because non-basis of self. So the self can never be wrong, even if it contradicts itself with its own potential pretense standard, right? This sort of pride that people take or personalize, again, personalizing everything, it's not you, right? It's the flawed process. It's not, to associate yourself with that is to miss the whole point and then be controlled by it, because you'll defend a flawed process just because you happen to be exposed to it, which is a big part of how contrivance then even works. And then the other point is the simple fact that you have, the outward insistence goes so far beyond even supposed functional basis, where that's a big fallacy, the false inherent contrivance response, that just because you're in this insular bubble of society doesn't mean that that's actually how the world works. And even to observe that objective reality would be like, that's like you somehow taking a position, but it's more just like it can be helpful to understand how the world actually works and why we contrive these things and how we contrive these things, instead of acting like, we're not contriving anything. That's just how it actually is because we're used to it and we've grew up in it and everything. So you hear that a lot. Like, people will have this insular perspective of like, no, this is actually how the world is. How could you say anything different? Or observe, or how could anything else different exist? Even though it's a constantly contrived construct like society, everything that we uphold is like, it's an outward artificial structure. That doesn't mean it's bad or you shouldn't do it, but that means you should acknowledge it and then hold it accountable, make sure it's actually serving the purpose you want it to, not being misused, not, maybe being redundant or overextended or whatever. So the point is, too, you would defer, you would give people the benefit of the doubt. Specifying and personalizing thought, again, is a major attack on it. Because then it comes down to you, like, discredit idiosyncrasies, that's just you, label you something, all because, again, you're shooting the messenger, in this case, the objective thinker, who anybody can do that. So it doesn't need to be an ego thing, it doesn't need to be personalized, doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be broached in such a way that you can just consider an idea. But then see, if you do that, it's the unwillingness to be puzzled that people have, absurdist concept, that unwillingness to be puzzled that would say, well, if you consider one thing objectively that isn't just a reinforcement of your worldview, then you can consider everything, and then you'll be always, there won't be like one committed aspect, like you'll be always torn between countless things, because instead you have to indignantly insist upon whatever you're doing is the absolute and everything else is somehow inferior, even though you know by any standard of metric or accountability that wouldn't be true, right? So there's always like some concession that you have to just deal with it. That's literally society's basis. Just deal with it, and that's honorable to do somehow, and if you don't, that's a bad thing, like having high standards is a bad thing, or actually having your criteria. So I like the way that's perceived too. Like, it's a privileged position to be able to think or to be able to hold accountable like that, as if the end result shouldn't be like, okay, maybe that's what's necessary. You're poor and you're this and that, and so therefore you have no choice and you have to deal with it. But that's not an argument for like, you don't appreciate it because, you had other options. But options aren't bad. Like you'll say, it desensitizes you to have more options or have a better state, higher standards. But it wouldn't be a bad thing because, yes, more options is a good thing and higher standards are a good thing. And, if that's what's necessary to see the truth of the world, instead of, let's, again, put you in, when you're born, you're in a prison cell and you live there your whole life, and you might not mind it because you won't know the difference. There is no outside. You'll never see that there's an outside. You'll think that's the whole world right there, right? And they'll come up with some mythology to explain everything, like, and so that's fine. Like, it ends up being okay because you have, so Stockholm Syndrome sort of society basis that would, you just deal with it just because it is, you don't have any actual standard. So that's what cognitive dissonance can be, and the absolutist measure could hold, is you can hold it in trust, either like a higher measure that you're always trying to get to, even if you don't know what it is, even if there isn't one in specific, just in general, or you would have this ability to, you would have this ability to basically like non is a negative and it's projected into something, and initial LCD basis, and the infinite objective mind, not being able to settle on one thing. That has to be that indignant insistence that we talk about, right? Like that's like the whole specify the conflict or general specification, like don't, in order to do something, a person can't just do it. They have to feel like, that's the absolute thing, the best thing must do, unquestionably, everything else is lesser. Like, you have to think about it like that. What you're doing is the absolute, otherwise you wouldn't do it. So there's like a healthy objectivity in this that could be considered, where you have, and this is where the long-form postulate can't be discredited either, even though it would be in myopic marginalization by a collective mass, indoctrinated, without consent, bypassing the critical thinking, especially in youth, but, lacking awareness of that basic reality. But the point being that you have a situation where you would, like the absolutist measure or hold something off to the side, you can do something but still have reservation about it. So imagine that possibility. Human beings are capable of doing that. You can do it, but you can still say, okay, I'm only doing this because it's necessary, functional, time period, even though it's a fallacy, even though it's just a functional basis contrivance, artificial, all these kind of things. So you can still recognize that, but you can still do it, or it would be difficult then to do it because of the cognitive dissonance associated, but it would be that framing, like, you would have to consider it, like, just because you do it doesn't mean it's absolute or the only thing. You can have standards, other considerations. You can at least try to do it, despite, again, the extreme contrivance. So one of the worst arguments is always discrediting you, like, oh, you want to be a minimalist, but, oh, how come you're not then? How come you're wearing a t-shirt made in a factory and all this kind of stuff? Like, well, maybe I sewed it myself, and maybe I have a little farm, and maybe I'm trying to do all that, minimalistic lifestyle. But it's difficult to do that because you have to still earn the right to do it, fallacy permission of society that you need to do the most basic inherent thing because, oh, I tried picking berries, but, oh, that was on somebody's property. And, oh, I tried, hunting animals, but, oh, it was against the law in that area. You can't hunt at this time, this place. The land is owned by the government, or a person. So you understand what that means is like, what that means is it's not actually a valid basis. And the reason why it's not a valid basis is because again, you can consider, it's like two things can be true. It doesn't always have to be that, oh, you're absolute, everything like that, but people indignantly insist in such a way that they tend to prefer that, and then unwilling to consider anything else. So you can consider an idea, and that doesn't, think about this as a hypothetical, right? You consider or talk about or discuss an idea in great detail and depth, right, a certain thought process, etc., and that doesn't mean that it defines you, like, oh, it's not your idea or your thought process, it's just an idea, a thought process, and you could consider it, and it doesn't have to be that you agree or disagree, you're just giving it thought, consideration, and it's not defined by you, it's not like, oh, it's your idea, and it's also, you're not defined by it because you discussed or considered it at one time for one period of time, right? Just like you could consider millions of ideas all throughout your life, doesn't mean that you're defined by it or it defined by you, and so you can just consider it. Imagine doing that, like just consider an idea, but oh, it's not a functional basis, and we get caught in this half-mass functional state, even though, it's a state that's requiring and relying on externality a lot. The idea that you're basically in a position to, you rely on that because the base of externality is like, I don't know, like it'd be reduced in some myopic short form, like, oh, look at this guy was thinking about this idea, that defines them. Now you'll always associate them with that because it says myopic framing. So the value of society isn't like a short form LCD, initial physical state. And the reason why it is that is because of the simple fact that the reason why it's like that is because the reason why it's like that comes down to some realization that comes down to a basic realization. It's difficult sometimes, like I said, to do this while driving, which is exclusively when I do it, basically. I'm going to make actually another channel. So this will be whatever. I don't like somehow the name on that one, so... And if you change the name, it doesn't change it all the way, so whatever. The point is that... Again, you can consider an idea, it doesn't define you, so everything would be reduced to like a short form, initial, oversimplified LCD thing, like, oh, he was thinking this one idea, or discussing this one idea, or observing this one idea at this one time, so that defines them. Even if, but then what about the other million seconds, million moments of their life where they're considering other ideas? What does that do for you? And the answer is, that's where the initial basis is so weak, because it's just like... you're reducing everything to that initial physical state, which is social contrivance, structure reduced, and everything like this that is at least limiting in scope. So now you have a situation where you would... I don't know, whatever. But yeah, the unwillingness to be puzzled, you can consider ideas, you don't have to be... It doesn't always have to be, like, there's this knee-jerk aspect of society that's like that, where... Oh my goodness, look at this thing, that like everything's undue emphasis, like, wow, what a big deal, everything's a big deal, and everything's like a reaction, like, let's insist upon this, let's, false absolute contrivance response, and, if you're aware of it, then that somehow invalidates it, so it's the awareness that's the issue we're defining, so don't think, don't observe, because that would invalidate the state. And anybody who does, they're the problem, not the fact that the state is self-invalidating, or again, not even self-invalidating, as in specifically invalidating, but when it is held as an absolute. Like, there are many different things you could do, many different measures, many different standards, right? It's not empirically justified, like, oh, you're in this one exact societal state, in this exact contrivance state. There's nothing that would justify that specifically, universally, one size fits all. So if you say, anything could be invalidated if you think about it deeply enough, but people just accept it, and they accept it because of the indoctrination, bypass, etc. So it's like you're discussing the functionality of training animals. Indeed, you can train animals if you indoctrinate them, if you control their environment, if you prevent critical thinking, in the way that we have the capacity for. Sure, you can control people's behavior then, and there's different degrees of functionalism to that. That doesn't mean that would be a rational thing to do, or, so it just shows you that that's what human society has always done and glorified. Like, we're going to treat human beings like animals and train them, like, in a minor way, but not all the way in life, but, like, especially when they're young. We're going to train them like animals and, have this structure to control their behavior. So that would be very questionable, because you wouldn't, if you actually thought about it, which of course nobody thinks, period, ever in society, in life, but let's just hypothetically consider that you would think, then that just defines you, and that's your fault, and that's your problem for thinking. But if you were hypothetically inclined to do that, you could say, well, would you be comfortable with that framing? That when people are born, they're trained like animals, indoctrinated, controlled, in a certain way, trained, we consider like, raising our kids, but you're training them like you would an animal, conditioning them to behave in certain ways, and even assuming that, they're good parents and good this and that. The fact that you have to do that shows you the contradiction, false inherent contrivance response. Human beings are morally good and morals are absolute. That's why we have to rigorously train them for years, right, when they're a kid, and then even after that, many of them still don't follow or abide by the same thing, so... So that's the whole irony of it, is like, I don't know. You wouldn't be comfortable with it, but it's the fault of, you just accept it, just mindlessly, blindly accept everything, just whatever. That doesn't make it a default functional kind of reliant, empirical, authoritative pre-con state. Does not make it actually valid, or again, not even so much valid, like, it's functional, but it's functional to a degree. It could be more functional this way, etc., etc. The point being that it wouldn't make it specifically, empirically, like, this is the only way to be, and everybody is this way, and this is the contrivance state that must be universally applied. There would be no way to do that. So that's why when it's specifically invalidating, it's like, it's not saying that, oh, it's just wrong, and here's something that's right. It's not like that, false duality. It would be one specific arbitrary aspect, and there are many others. So you might think, oh, it's a result of some form of Darwinism and meritocracy, but it's sort of, there's some vague pretense of that, but it's not full. It's not fully committed to that, so you would have to decide for yourself. And it projects, it assumes measure, assumes intent, it fallacy perm, it takes like, think about it this way. When you're born, you have a lot of, anything that you can physically be capable of doing, you can do, and think, and etc. So you're very free, and you have plenty of capabilities. A lot of that is stripped away from you as you're inhibited by society, indoctrinated, etc. You might think, oh, it's only the harmful things, but it's overextended well beyond that. But even if it was, there's a functional pretense at work here. So all your inherent capabilities are stripped away from you, and if you do that, then your inherent capabilities are stripped away, like many of your, human variable, all the things you could potentially do. So, and now you have to, like, earn them back. Like, oh, if you work hard enough, you might be able to get away from contrivance and retire in a log cabin somewhere, or, you have to appease contrivance and get permission from it to do something that would be otherwise your basic element. Even things that aren't hurting other people, even things that have nothing to do with anything else, like, it becomes overextended so far, like, again, you always, like, need permission from society to do every little thing. And beyond that is, again, you have to qualify, like, why do I have to do this thing? I have to justify, oh, I need to do this thing, or it's okay for me to do this thing because of blank. I have to earn the right to do this thing that I inherently would be capable of doing as I'm born, and as I'm, just in my natural state. So you have to somehow justify doing it, not that society has to justify preventing you from doing it, or inhibiting you, or restricting you, or taking away that ability, right? It's not that society has to justify preventing you from doing it, which, again, if that was the case, there'd be very, very few things you could really do. Like, okay, you can't kill somebody, right? That's understandable. But outside of those elements, like something very clear like that, it becomes overextended. So you have this case of not that you should have to justify what you're doing or why you're doing it, but it would have to justify why it would be inhibiting you or preventing you from doing it in such a way that feels like, again, similar to even government. You could look at this space as, like, you don't need to justify, like, oh, why do you need to own a gun, or why do you need to blank or blank. It's why shouldn't you be able to do anything, like, right, why shouldn't you be able to do this or that? They need a good reason to take it away from you. You haven't done anything wrong, so you can't use the actions of, you can't use the actions of a few people, like, when you use the actions of a few to restrict the many, you become like a fascist, basically, or a dictator or whatever. You become an authoritarian. Like, you use the bad actions of a few people to restrict the actions of everybody. The bad actions of a few to restrict many. But no, the point being that you shouldn't need to justify something that way, like, oh, I have to, I should be able to do this because of blank, and I have to prove myself, and because that's the inherent fallacy of contrivance response. Human beings are inherently good, and the way that society is the way that the world really works. Like, morality is absolute. It's not just a human construct. Also, after extreme indoctrination, etc., as a kid, that you're raised and indoctrinated and constantly reinforced socially throughout your life, even as you get older, things like that, So on one hand, it's a false inherent, but it's also clearly you're seeing the makings of how it comes to be. Again, it's not a functional argument. It's not saying, oh, you shouldn't do that, or the way you should do it. That would be a separate issue. But it's a case, like, on one hand, you pretend it's inherent and absolute. Society tends to do. But then you see the makings of it. But then further, when it is subverted, it'll be like, somehow you're not acknowledging the flawed, invalid nature of the process. But even all outside of that, you have something else here that is, as if you should need to justify, as if you should need to, like assuming that the negative nature. So you have all this contrivance response, but you assume like, oh, people are inherently good or something. But you actually, in practice, right, you assume people are bad. And the reason why is because, you assume people are bad and so incapable and all this, that they can't handle themselves and they couldn't self-govern and they can't, self-actualize or do anything. So they have to be restrained and treated like animals. So you assume the worst of everybody all the time. Cynical basis, enforcement. So you have to assume the worst of everyone all the time. And then only, everything is a privilege that you get to do instead. What if your ability or self-control, awareness, etc. was so great that like all that's just an obstacle to you, that, oh, you don't need any of that, I can just self-govern, I don't need society, and like you're above those tendencies too, like, oh, you got to be controlled, like, treated like an animal that can't control itself. So that's the self-created fallacy that you could try to, absolutists move towards self-governance. But again, this would be like this thing, oh, but that's a contradiction, then why aren't you self-governing if that's the case? But you would have to have it where people get to the point. I mean, you could be capable of that yourself, theoretically, in a vacuum, but you would have to get to the point where people are capable of doing that. So even you would recognize, oh no, people aren't there yet, they're so used to this and coddled by this structure. But yeah, you assume, I have a few expressions like this. Society assumes the badness of people, but relies on the goodness of people, kind of like. So society is built on the basis that people are inherently bad, but it relies on the fact that people are actively, outwardly good. So it assumes we're all bad because it says, we have all these laws and restrictions and inhibitions and things that apply to everybody, right? Like you're guilty until proven innocent, not in a literal sense, but like, it always assumes that, like, oh, we got to be weary of everybody, we got to have rules in place. If you were inherently good, then you wouldn't need those rules because you would already follow them, right? So you need that, like, it works in reverse. You assume everybody's bad, so you indoctrinate them, train them, social stigma, social accountability, constant enforcement, threat, everything like this. And then, but it relies on the goodness of people because, again, there's too many people to control. So if you're in the U.S. and there's 300 million people, right, if all 300 million wanted to do something, kill each other and do this, you couldn't stop it, right? The government and soldiers and everything, it wouldn't be enough. Or if even 100 million wanted to do something extreme, you can't stop that many people. So it depends on the goodness of people that way, that they just won't do something. So everything else goes out the window then, otherwise. Or it depends on the goodness of people in this sense too. Like, you're walking down the street and you feel secure because, oh, police exist and laws and stuff. But in reality, if somebody walking behind you on the street wants to just come up to you and whack you over the head and just kill you, right, you would never see it coming. You wouldn't be able to stop it. Somebody breaks in your home in the middle of the night, kills you in your sleep. Like, if somebody really wanted to do it, they could. So you can't be looking over your shoulder all the time in society and sort of doubting your neighbors. This came up kind of with the whole Trump thing. Like, if you don't trust your neighbors, and if it's so easy to turn you against them, like through the corporate-owned media, like, if you don't trust your own neighbors, then society just doesn't work. Because if you think everybody's out to get you, like, oh, I'm walking down the street and I have to always be worried that some random person could just randomly kill me, walking on the other way on the street. if you think that, then you'll never feel secure, because again, oh, I'm in my house and somebody could break in, and you would never feel secure, and so you'd feel like society doesn't work then, because there's too many people, so you have to sort of believe in the goodness of people. Otherwise, you'll always be looking over your shoulder and you'll never feel safe, and anybody can do anything at any time. And if you truly think that way, right, then you could never stop it. You would never see it coming. You'd never be able to predict it, prevent it, anything like that. So it's sort of a strange duality. Like, there's this cynicism and this application that, oh, people are bad, and inherent nature is acknowledged, but then by our own subjective standard. But then you also have to trust and believe that, oh, people are going to be good, because if not, you're always going to be looking over your shoulder and you'll never feel at peace or safe. And but yeah, I'm gonna start a channel, Cinephile Conduit, and the reason why is because I like that name better. Unfortunately, it doesn't, like, if you change your channel name, it doesn't change it, like, in the thing, in the it doesn't change it, like, in the actual, like, the search and everything like that. I get, because I only have 2 subscribers on there, and some of my videos do have a decent number of views, but I don't know. I think I'd rather just restart. And then maybe I shouldn't use that channel art either, even though I kind of want to. I'll probably still use it, I don't care. It's like it'll still say the wrong name. That, and then a kick, I have the kick for that, which I could do, I guess I could make another kick, or maybe not, I don't know. Yeah, because even that was giving me a hard time changing the name on that. It's very hard to do that, because then even if you look it up later, the old name, it'll still always show up. Like, it'll never clear that out, truly. So yeah, I could re-roll. I mean, what's the harm? 2 subscribers. I got a decent amount of views on a couple of videos, like the Larry David. I could almost just repost everything on here, but I might just leave it and then just start afresh here for some reason. And I'll make it more clear as to my whole intention with the philosophy and all this, like, as I didn't make that clear enough on the other channel. It just sort of bleeds into it, but anything that I'm doing could be let's look at a concept here, that the stoplight represents the concession of humanity to a contrivance state. Like, if you can get people to do something mindlessly, routinely, without questioning it, deferring to a process, even if it serves no actual purpose, then you can make them do anything, because it's all within the pretense of something. But that shows you it's not tied to some actual harm, help, functional basis. So, like, a stop light or stop sign, if nobody's there, nobody's around, it serves no purpose, but, oh, you would still get in trouble, still arrested, so you still got to do it. Versus if somebody's there, so, like, again, it doesn't trust a human's judgment, it doesn't show any ability or trust in people, right? So it's like, because they're dumb and incapable, now you have to be held back too. Everybody has to be held back. Instead of, like, okay, if it's a functional basis, like, deal with it this way. Like, I'll deal with the consequences of what happens in something, but you don't get to overextend and preempt that. But that assumes the incapability of people, so you have to suffer for that collective contrivance state. But also you have a situation where you have a situation where, again, if the light is red, you stop. If the light is green, you go. Even if there's nobody else there, even if it doesn't serve a purpose, even if it's not only not functional, but even adverse, objectively unqualified, everything. So, you're getting, it's a good example of just sort of this deference and thing, like concession to contrivance. It might not serve a purpose. It might even be adverse objectively, waste of time, functionalist, but you still just do it anyway because it shows that you don't have like a true value state. It's just all reactionary, all contrivance for contrivance's sake with a pretense of functionalism, but as if it assumes you to be so incapable that everything should just be controlled for you, and just you got to have like an auto self-driving car that just supersedes that for legal purposes too, like it'll drive the right way, which you won't do, and everything like that.